Welcome back to Compound Thesis. Our guest today is Rebecca Rettig. She's the Chief Policy Officer at Polygon Labs. And prior to Polygon, Rebecca was the Chief Legal Officer at Aave and a partner at several law firms advising clients in the blockchain space. So on the show today, we're going to unpack just the flurry of events that are happening in the US crypto legislation and regulation space, implications for builders in crypto, and how Polygon is navigating these developments. Rebecca, super excited to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so before we dive in, for those unfamiliar with Polygon, can you tell us a little bit about the organization and your role as Chief Policy Officer?
Sure. So Polygon Labs is a software development company that builds blockchain scaling infrastructure. So has built and is continuing to build a number of different networks that look to scale Ethereum, make transactions faster, cheaper, and more efficient overall, which I think will be great for the space for applications like the Compound and others, both in DeFi and in Web3 generally. And then we've also actually built out, this is interesting from the policy perspective, a digital identity solution called Polygon ID, which is interesting when people start talking about, illicit finance and how you are going to identify people. In terms of my role here, I started in January. I think Polygon sits at a very important place in the crypto ecosystem because it does have lots of crypto native projects, but it also has really large brands across all different aspects of industry. So large financial services have deployed their applications on the Polygon network, again, in a permissionless way, because it's a permissionless proof of stake network, but also consumer applications like Starbucks, Nike, Doritos, and plenty of others. And so this idea that, there's only this narrow niche use case for crypto and it doesn't have any value, I think is undercut by watching the Polygon ecosystem grow out with lots of different use cases.
Yeah, especially like the Starbucks news, I think was super compelling too for, loyalty and consumer, engagement. So there's a ton that, brands like that are being able to build on top of Polygon to connect more directly with their consumers and create those experiences that they otherwise couldn't in kind of a Web2 world.
Yeah. And whereas loyalty, was always built out to be really good for the company for the most part, and then have less utility or less benefit for the users, but some obviously are for the consumers. I think Web3 loyalty programs actually have a dual utility that may put the balance a bit back to where it should be. So I think that's a really exciting thing that people don't talk about a lot, but that we are actually starting to talk about a lot in DC. And we can, highlight certain use cases that are on the Polygon network and ones that are other places as well. So I think taking on a policy role where we can, where I could really highlight various different ways that crypto blockchain-based applications are being built out has been really helpful for the policy narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to dive into that because I know that you've been spending a lot of time collecting a lot of those use cases so that you can present that to, folks, not just in DC, but around the globe. I think you were in Japan a few weeks ago. So great to kind of dive into that. But before we do, let's just kind of take a step back. The rules and regulations for crypto in the US are, at best unclear and at worst hostile. There's been a flurry of events, multiple hearings on Capitol Hill. SEC continues to go after the space, and Coinbase sued the SEC just a month after receiving the Wells notice. So can you just tell us a little bit, from your view, why has the US taken such a, that approach towards crypto, and especially when compared to the rest of the globe, which appears to be relatively welcoming to crypto innovation?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think to your point, talking about the international front will be important too, just so people understand that there is a vast difference when you're engaging with regulators and policymakers abroad versus how I think the crypto industry is feeling about being in the United States right now and what types of risks there may be. I think there are a few things that are going on in the United States. I think we definitely saw, especially with the president's executive order, back at the end of 2022, maybe, I don't remember the exact date, that there was at least interest in understanding that this new technology could bring innovation, could help the economy, should ensure that America remained competitive in a global economy generally. But I do think that the events at the end of 2022, and in particular, the collapse through the fraud of that, or the alleged fraud
Which
with
was not
FTX,
crypto, right?
yeah, is really one of the things that has shifted the narrative in DC and with the administration. I think that Sam was so embedded in much of the fabric in DC, and he spoke what felt like a language that regulators and policymakers hadn't heard before in terms of compliance. And um, their voices were out there before, but I think Sam really came forward in a way, one, that was very, very loud, and two, he and his family know the political operations of DC. His parents were supposedly Clinton bundlers and really understands the political apparatus. And so I think that there is an understandable feeling of betrayal.
Mm,
That people really let Sam in, they really believed him. And so now there's a resistance because it feels like the cryptos for criminal narratives that had started dying down a bit really came true. So I think people are looking at the industry with renewed skepticism, understandably and probably fairly. But I do think, to the point you made about this, being very different internationally, we just saw the EU vote in the markets and crypto asset regulation, which is a comprehensive piece of legislation for centralized actors in the crypto asset space and for stablecoin issuers, and to talk about how token issuance will work. The UK's crypto asset consultation just closed on April 30th, and they are proposing a regulatory regime very, very similar to MiCA to regulate centralized actors first and then look at more innovative applications later. That's what MiCA does too. It's excluded DeFi and NFTs.
right.
Japan has had centralized crypto asset regulation for a long time. Now they're studying DeFi. So this is happening around the globe. I actually just talked to some policymakers in Africa recently, and
Mm,
they're thinking about, one, how important these use cases are for things, especially in elections there, and other types of things that we may not need in more developed countries or countries with more developed systems. So this is happening globally, and international regulators too, like the Bank of International Settlements and the Financial Stability Board and the IMF, are really looking at this as well and talking about how to build out regulation. I think that's very important. I think the last thing I'll say on the international versus US front is, we've heard that there are a number of policymakers who either hope this completely goes overseas or hopes that this is banned and
mm,
doesn't exist anymore. One, it is going to continue to exist because it is designed to be somewhat, global and borderless. So
right.
it will exist outside of the United States if that's what happens. Two, you cannot ban this technology technologically. And three, the IMF, in its most recent report on crypto assets, said you should not ban crypto. And they have this whole um, two-page box on why trying to ban crypto is actually not the right policy response, and that regulating it is the right policy response for a variety of different reasons, including, by the way, to protect the supremacy of fiat currency, right? Which is what most regulators want to see. So there are lots of good benefits to putting regulation in place, including those that will benefit the government from a long-term perspective.
Are you seeing engagement though? Like, so after there was, a number of hearings on the Hill over the last few weeks, are the doors open? Is there constructive dialogue at this stage, or is it still, at least, in some pockets?
Yes, there is engagement on the Hill. I will say that the crypto policy arm and apparatus is very much engaged and activated, including with people who have been in policy in financial services or tech for a very, very long time, and who know how to engage in a very sophisticated way and who have deep relationships in DC. I would say that the people who are actually some of the people who are the most skeptical, not the very most skeptical, but some of the skeptics that we know about still will speak to industry. I
Mhm.
think the agencies outside of the SEC are actually very open to collaboration and education by industry. So I wouldn't do this all hope is lost and just pack up and go abroad right now. I think that it's really important for the industry to keep engaging. And then a consensus last week, House Financial Services Chairman Patrick McHenry announced that he plans to put out a comprehensive market infrastructure bill on crypto assets in the next 2 months. I think that will be a very important starting point for pushing the conversation forward and debating what is and is not good regulation for this industry as we move forward in the United States.
Will that focus on specific areas like stable coins or, centralized exchanges or asset issuers? Like, where's most of the focus, maybe in that bill or just in broadly for legislators right now?
I think that what we can likely expect is what we see in other places around the world, which is um, comprehensive regulation for centralized actors in the crypto space. That makes sense from a general perspective. We know what to do with intermediaries, right? That's what we do in the traditional financial and tech system. Although, interestingly enough, I was just looking at a number of articles about regulating big tech, and I think that's been, Twitter, Facebook, Google, things like that. That has been a bigger challenge in terms of thinking about how to regulate tech versus how you regulate financial services. So we're trying to cut across these two sectors here. But the centralized crypto intermediaries look like traditional financial intermediaries. And so even if there's not a perfect regulatory framework in the securities laws or the commodities laws, we at least have a framework from which to start. And so I think that's what we will see first. And the responsible centralized crypto players want that. That's
Right.
good for their business, right? We've seen, yeah, clarity is, I think, become very overused. But they want to be able to operate their business in the United States, and Coinbase is a public company, and I think it is very hard to navigate meeting your fiduciary duties, right, which is what you have to do when you're a public company. You have duties to your shareholders in an environment where, to your point, you just don't know what's going to happen next. And so I think they want that for the purpose of being able to run a business in the United States, and be a public company in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, well, today Coinbase announced that they launched their perps exchange, offshore. So,
Right.
you're already seeing, people moving with their feet to create opportunities that are not within, the borders of this country, which is really unfortunate to see. So,
Yeah.
like with that happening, what's the impact you're seeing for crypto companies, for consumers, for investors, as like this, environment continues to, permeate?
I think that for large, already established centralized companies, they're not just going to all pick up and move immediately. I think there's a meaningful desire to stick it out and see if we can get good legislation in the United States. I think for new software developers, they are not going to start their companies in the United States. When you talk to either VCs or their actual portcos, they are all setting up overseas and trying to figure out which is the best jurisdiction. So there is a real opportunity, and sort of when you're behind closed doors with international regulators, I think they understand that there's an opportunity here from an economic perspective to incentivize software development and technology to come to their jurisdiction. So that's definitely occurring. And I think obviously people are exploring, including the centralized actors, as you said, Coinbase made their announcement for their overseas exchange today, of what it will look like to be international, maybe 3 to 5 years down the road.
So with all this that's happening, how is Polygon specifically like navigating and advocating for innovation? Like, what are you actually doing, boots on the ground?
Yeah. So boots on the ground, we are engaging internationally. Polygon Labs is an international global software development company. We have people in 43 countries around the world. So we care that this gets built out really meaningfully in lots of different jurisdictions. So engaging with lots of different regulators and policymakers, although, they're not so far apart when you're talking internationally in terms of what they're going to build out and how they're going to build it out. So I think there will be some uniformity. It may not be perfect, but I do think that there is a consensus, not to use that word ironically, but there's a consensus over what good regulation for certainly centralized crypto asset players looks like. But boots on the ground, we're talking to people everywhere. We are making meaningful proposals. We just responded to the UK's crypto asset consultation, but we are also making our positions public because we think that is really helpful. One, because it basically means regulators and policymakers can crowdsource ideas. And hopefully then, as I said, there will be uniformity, especially for things that are much more on the innovative side of things. And then we are also involved where people ask us to help write legislation or laws, try to do that, again, on the more innovative side. The centralized players have great policy teams. We defer to them and think they're doing great work, including globally as well. But we really are in the business of thinking about protecting software development and allowing there to be continued innovation. And that's one side of things, very important. The other side is thinking about and educating about how you can ensure these policy goals of consumer protection, market integrity, combating illicit finance in a new permissionless, decentralized world, because it is a bit more complex than what we've been used to date.
So as you're making, your recommendations or you're evaluating the landscape, I think Polygon put out like a call to action for people to come through and provide use cases or examples of where this technology is being applied in the real world, right? We can talk about a lot of the, principles of this industry, but having actually real tangible use cases is really empowering for, regulators to understand exactly the impact that this industry is making. What are some of the top examples that you saw come out of that are really resonating?
Well, we actually did a Web3 IRL event in DC a few weeks ago. Coinbase put it on and brought a lot of great different actors together. Gitcoin was there, Filecoin was there, Polygon Labs was there, and a number of others were there. And the use cases we highlighted were that the US Air Force is using permissionless blockchains to enhance their supply chain and make it more efficient. I think that's pretty important to see. I
Sure.
think that we also highlighted a use case where farmers are using carbon credits to help their business. And the last was that UNICEF is trying to create DAOs in order to do more crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. But there are tons out there that, by the way, are not only on the Polygon network. So we want to hear from everybody, wherever the use case may be. So those are really interesting ones. I think the other ones that we sort of started talking about early on, and maybe we'll resurge it now, is these consumer-based applications, because I think that does change the landscape of how consumers get services, rewards, access to lots of different type of services as we go forward. And one of the things we did during this Web3 IRL event was have a slide that showed the companies that had independently deployed on the Polygon network. And people came up and said, oh, is this who you hope deploys? Or, are these people thinking about making blockchain-based applications? And we said, no, these are people who already have, or companies that already have blockchain-based applications, right? Like the Nike swoosh and Starbucks, but also, JP Morgan did the Onyx experiment last year. Obviously that was in Singapore, not in the US, but they've engaged in that. Robinhood, a lot of fashion brands, right? Sephora, Gucci, and others. And so I think that is what most people wanted to focus on and talk about. And I think highlighting use cases will help shift this narrative, which we saw both in the president's economic report and other places, that there's no use for crypto and it's just a casino and all of those other things.
Yeah. Well, and are you engaging then with the I guess the folks on the Web2 side as well, helping them bring that use case to the regulators as well, and saying, hey, this is not just Polygon that's delivering this message, but here is Starbucks, here is Nike, and here is the Air Force that are actually coming to the table and advocating for this as well?
Working on it.
Yeah.
To your point, I think that will be very powerful.
Sure.
They have, I think given the environment in the United States, maybe there's some hesitation to just come forward and talk about your blockchain-based applications in DC, but especially when they have nothing to do with tokenization, right? And are just totally separate type of, NFT-based applications and the like.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you that thinking about Web2 or just consumer-facing companies coming to explain why blockchain is part of the business and why they are thinking of it as part of it for their future is really important.
Be really powerful. Yeah. And, I kind of we had Morgan Kropetsky from Ava Labs on our podcast last week, and they were talking about some of the institutional adoption that they're seeing at Avalanche. And it's really great to see these kind of test nets that are being built, where, the likes of T. Rowe Price and Wisdom Tree and some other, trading shops are being able to use these environments to prove use cases, and really doing a lot of research and, cost benefit analysis of what does the, existing infrastructure look like today versus what can be done in this new environment, in a completely riskless fashion, to prove out those use cases and kind of build that out. And it takes time, right? This kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight, and it's an iterative process, but it's great to see the engagement happening there, because this is not just coming from the crypto community, but it's a collaboration on both sides of the table.
Right. And the most interesting thing is, notwithstanding the events of 2022 and maybe some of the larger traditional financial industry players quieting down about their blockchain efforts, they didn't stop them.
Yeah, right.
Right?
The momentum keeps going. Right.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
They just may be less public, or to your point, maybe it's slowed down a little bit, but it certainly hasn't stopped. And I think there's a lot of innovation continuing on inside the large traditional financial institutions with tokenization of deposits, other tokenization of real world assets, and other types of experimentation that I think we'll see come forward in the next maybe 3 years or so.
It is amazing that we're having this conversation amidst a complete meltdown of the banking industry as well, despite all the regulation that was imposed and supposed protections for investors in some of these, whether they're depositors or shareholders, that are just getting wiped out or being moved to a larger institution where like concentration of risk just continues to get stronger and stronger. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's kind of ironic.
Compound and Ave held up.
Yeah, and they sure did. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So looking forward, is there any precedent to look to, like, any other industries? I think you touched on like big tech, but like the fintech industry has certainly faced a lot of headwinds. Or is there any other kind of precedent out there that you kind of lean on to say, hey, there's been environments that have been not so friendly for innovation, but we've seen our way through it to the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started thinking about policy work in this space, I went to go look at comprehensive regulation for Web 2, and it's not analogous. I think that's sort of part of the problem that we're in, right? That when the internet was built, and I think Mark Andreessen talks about this, when he talks about sort of the advent of the internet, there was an intentional thought to leave out the financial layer from this when you did the advent of the internet. And now we're here. And so internet regulation doesn't fit perfectly and financial regulation doesn't fit perfectly. And that's why you do need this hybrid place. And I think even when you look at something like the UK's crypto asset consultation, they do see overlap, right, with their financial services regulation and understand that there will be touch point with some of their traditional financial services laws, but also that there is a need to think about how this works in this new environment where you have permissionless, decentralized, issuers who are no longer the issuers after the token is released, things like that. So I think that we can draw from both of those, but there's nothing that's going to give us the right guidepost. I think the two most important guiding factors are, do you understand the technology,
Mm-hmm.
and do you understand the law? And that's a hard combo to find for the most part. But I think if you find people who understand the tech and the law, and you do have these public-private partnerships and industry continues to meaningfully engage with lawmakers, then we're going to get to a very good result. Will it be perfect? Probably not. But what is? And I think for sure in this endeavor, let's not have the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, no, and it's positive to see the Richie Torreses of the world and the McHenrys and the Emmers of the world that are advocating for both, right? The technology and the structure. So there is a lot that's happening despite some of the headlines. So great to see, all the work that you're doing. Before I let you go, any takeaways or closing thoughts? I know we covered a lot of ground there already.
No, our use case database form is open. Keep submitting it. Interestingly, we have had regulators and policymakers across the globe reach out and say they saw about it on social media. So remember, everybody in the space, that they definitely look at social media and say, when is it going to be ready? Because we want to use this. So definitely engage on that front. And for people who want to be involved, make sure you're reaching out or finding somebody that because the more efforts there are, the better off we will all be.
We have an election cycle coming up not too soon as well. So, advocating and getting active in that, this is a very important time.
Yeah, on that front, I will say, I think that because industry has been in this murky place for a long time, there may be less political activation. And so, people will say, well, we don't hear from constituents who, care or want us to do something about this. So Coinbase 435 is a great way to do that. I've also posted things on Twitter to say, find your representative. Here's how you can call and leave a message. Here's how you can send them an email. So I think if you're in the United States, it's really important to reach out and say you care and make this a real political issue going forward.
Well, we will put your Twitter handle alongside this episode so everybody can reach out and engage and see all the great work that you're doing. Thanks so much for joining us today. I know you've got a ton on your plate, so but we're really happy to share this with you. So thanks everybody else for tuning in. Listen and subscribe to Compound Thesis. We're up on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify, and you can find us at youtube.com/@compoundlabs. Give us a like, share it with your friends, and stay tuned for our next episode. Talk to you soon, Rebecca.
Thanks.